To the October 21st, 2015 Agency Operation Committee meeting, and remind everyone that this is being broadcast live versus via the internet. If you would, please silence your cell phones and any other devices. I also want to announce that Bobby Jenkins is officially an ex officio member of this committee. Therefore, in accordance with the board's long-standing practice, he will not be included in the quorum count. And since we have 3 voting members in attendance, along with our student member, out of a total of 5 voting members, we have a quorum. The first agenda item is approval of the minutes of the July 22 Agency Operations Committee meeting. Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
So moved.
I heard a motion. I heard a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Next item is public testimony. We did not receive requests for public testimony, so we'll move on to the next item. Next item is item 4, the agency operations consideration of increase in the commissioner's annual salary. We are going to take this up first in executive session in accordance with state law, and then we'll come out of executive session and consider that. So moving on, I would like to move on to the next, and we'll postpone discussion of that until we're in executive session. Next is item B, under agency operations, a report on grants and contracts, including those exceeding $1 million. Our General Counsel, Bill Franz, will explain this item, and there is a handout in front of you as well. Mr. Franz.
Thank you, Dr. Tischer. Good afternoon, everybody. This item, and there should be not only a handout in front of you, but I'm advised that you should have each received an email with the list of contracts between the period of time of June 18 and September 15, 2015. And what we want to do today is put this item on the agenda so that if you have questions, we'll do our best to answer those questions. And we're also breaking out contracts and grants that exceed $1 million, and you also have that as a handout, simply in an effort to be more transparent than we've been previously. As you may recall, this has always been an attachment to the board members' agendas, but we've never had it actually as a discussion item on the agenda. And so that's what we're doing today. I'd be pleased to attempt to answer any questions anyone may have. And if I can't, we have people here that hopefully would be able to.
Members, are there any questions? Thank you. Please.
I just want to make sure that the committee would like to have this as a regular standing agenda item for future meetings, or would you like to have this on an annual basis, quarterly basis, or not at all, however you
I think quarterly would be optimal. I think the transparency is appreciated, and certainly we receive this, so I've read the list, and so I appreciate it being out to us before we meet here. The fact that there's no questions means we've probably already had our questions answered individually. I do appreciate the transparency, though.
Thank you.
Members, are you okay with receiving these as quarterly reports?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm assuming that we're all appreciating that as well. Thank you. Next is item 5, finance. The first item in this section is a year-to-date fiscal year 2015 financial report. Ken Martin, Assistant Commissioner for Financial Services and CFO, will present this. This item does not require any action. Ken, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. This is a report that is distributed to the committee every quarter. It's also distributed internally on a monthly basis. This is the year-end report for fiscal year 15. As I normally do, I'll walk you through a few key items, and if you have any questions on any other items within this, feel free and I'll answer those. If I can turn your attention to page 2. 2 is a summary of our operating and trustee funding and the remaining balance versus our budget. So I'll just go through a couple key items on here that you'll see. Goal B, the second line there. The goal is basically all of our strategies that are delineated by LBB and us within the GAA, General Appropriations Act, and they get rolled up into a goal. This has all of those items rolled up in Goal B, and we have $6.2 million of an outstanding balance. This is predominantly a T-STEM program that is being administered and was funded by $30 million from a donation from Texas Guarantee Student Loan Corporation. This is a program that will have those funds UB. They will transfer into fiscal year 16 and then should be fully utilized within 16 and 17 of this biennium. The next line item to note is Goal D. We had $1.1 million remaining. That is predominantly our Physician Education Loan Repayment Program, and these are donated funds that we received that have accumulated, and we will UB those again into fiscal year 16 to be utilized in this upcoming year. And then at the very bottom, or second to the bottom, Goal H. Those are two programs that utilize what we call tobacco funds. These are permanent funds that are separate from general revenue and a separate account within the comptroller. And these funds will also have UB authority into the subsequent year. At the very bottom, you'll notice Goal I, our indirect administration. We have $532,000 remaining. These are funded through a portion of loan funds, and this was partly due to staffing changes that we had. We had some staffing leave, and so we had some gaps, which caused some savings, as well as our continued focus on running the operation as lean as possible. These funds will transfer back into loan funds to be utilized within the loan program or fund administration for this coming year. Now, if I can turn your attention to page 11 out of 16. Page 11 has a pie chart at the top, and this is our cash balance summary. So this is a breakout of our cash balances of our loan funds, our debt service funds, and our unappropriated funds on page 11. There should be a pie chart up top, and then at the bottom you'll see a blue line graph. In the pie chart itself, in our loan funds, we have the Student Loan Auxiliary Fund, the SLA, and our Texas Opportunity Plan Fund, the TOP Fund, as we call it. That has $103 million at the end of the year. And below our debt service funds, we had $117 million remaining at the end of year. And point to note there is we have a requirement that at the end of the year prior, we have to have the funding necessary to meet the debt service requirement for the upcoming year. So we had approximately $97 million of debt service requirement for this year, fiscal year 16, and you can see that we well exceeded that. Excess funds in this account can transfer back into our student loan fund to be utilized for loans. And over to the left, we have the gray area, our unappropriated cash. That is predominantly when you take your attention down to the line graph, those two items there are beyond time and our physician education loan repayment accounts. Those accounts have had consistently legislative appropriations that have been lower than what has been coming in through either tuition set-asides or other funding sources. On our beyond time loan account, as the 84th legislative session, and we noted earlier in prior meetings that the set-asides are terminated. The program is going into repayment only, and so no new funding will be utilized in the beyond time account. $65 million is authorized, and we're working with LBB to be distributed back to institutions this year. So this account will go down significantly, as well as $36 million will be utilized to fund the renewals this year. So you'll start seeing that account go down over the course of this year and subsequent years. And the physician education loan repayment account is similar. There's legislation that eliminated the set-asides as well as eliminated the tobacco tax, smokeless tobacco tax that was being deposited into the account until the account goes down to zero. When at such time the funds are needed, they'll be reinstated into that account. So this account will go into self-serving mode basically to fund itself over the next couple years until they draw down that balance. This was an attempt from the state standpoint to wean themselves from the reliance of all these dedicated unappropriated accounts from a while ago during their session that helped them balance the budget. If I can turn your attention to the next page, page 10. Just the very top chart I'll walk you through. This shows you our loan balances for our loan program and some of the growth. So the first section on the left is FY11. You can see between FY11 and FY15, we've grown approximately $290 million in our loan portfolio, which is about 25% over that time period, and $80 million just over the last year. So it's a significant growth for the program over time. If I can turn your attention to the very last page. This item I've gone through previously, and I'll note again, we talked about this with the Office of Attorney General contract that we presented as our collections team that we have at the Office of Attorney General, and the good work that they do. And the right-hand chart shows the annual collections and the trend, positive trend that has been occurring with that area. And over to the left, it allows you to see some of the fees, court costs, attorney fees that they're able to collect. So what they in the total fee column, you can see what they've added, meaning they've added to accounts over the years. So they added charged $2.3 million of fees, and they were able to collect $1.3 million overall loans, not just this pool, but overall loans through that same time period. So some good efforts. 58% of the litigation-related fees that are assessed are recovered, and $9.8 million, almost $10 million, was collected throughout the year. And I'm happy to answer any questions on this particular report.
Members, any questions? John?
Thank you for that report. Even though this is a committee meeting, we were talking earlier about transparency. How about the next time you give us a report, could you put this information up so other people could see it, people sitting in the
absolutely.
audience and people watching?
Absolutely. We can put this in a PowerPoint format, what have you.
I think that would
Absolutely.
be helpful. And so it's not just something we're looking at and everybody else is not privy to.
Good
Mr.
suggestion.
Chairman,
Thank you.
I also want to mention it is on our website, so people who are here know that it's posted on our website with the rest of our materials, but we will certainly do that in the future.
I think as he's going through his presentation,
It's
I'd
nice
like
to
for people to be
follow
on
along.
those screens to be able to look at what we're looking at.
Right. It would get projected here, and then it would be also projected there in front of us. But this is fine for us to see, but I agree with John, the folks in the audience can't see it. So, any questions, sir? Ken, the only question I had is goal H, 23.3%. Is that high? Was it predictable? Is that unusual? It seems an awful lot left.
From what I've spoken with the division on this program is that these are grants, but they have unique circumstances. One is nursing, allied health, et cetera. And so the entities have to meet certain requirements on these, and that they go out with full application and intent to expend. They may get applications back, and it may not be enough to fully utilize the funds. The funds have historically had UB authority within the biennium as well as cross-biennium. So because they're in these permanent funds, the state legislature would have to reappropriate these funds to another purpose if they so chose. But this does allow at least the division flexibility to go out with full requests to try and fully utilize the funds, knowing that they have UB authority, and then it just carries over to the next year for them to utilize with any new funds coming into that program.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Next item is the loan management system upgrade. Ken Martin, our CFO, Assistant Commissioner of Financial Services, will present this, and this also does not require any action. Ken.
Thank you. This item here, as you know, we are in the midst of upgrading a loan system. Can we get the presentation? Put on that.
Yeah, we're seeing what you see
Okay,
now.
there we go. Good. I didn't know if I couldn't see your screen. I apologize. As you know, we're in the process of upgrading the student loan system that we have. Department of Information Resources has a master service agreement. Excuse me. We're up in the process of updating the loan system, and we have a contract with Nelnet, a vendor that we selected. We went to the board with an RFQ, which was approved. We went through selection of vendors, and Nelnet was selected. In this summer, we actually signed the contract, had it fully executed, and we began discussions in the build-out of a project plan. I will have Mr. Sid Hodgson describe the process that we're going through now and going forward.
Thank you, Ken. Sid Hodgson, Assistant Commissioner, Information Solutions and Services. On the slide in front of you, you can see some of the activities our staff have been involved in since the signing of the contract and the kickoff on September 8th. And before coming here, I looked at our project team roster, and we have around 30 agency staff who are actually involved in the project in one role or other. And that's pretty equally distributed between Ken and Chad's staff and borrower services and my IT staff. So there's a lot of people involved in this effort, working very hard to make it a success. Some of the activities, and these are by no means all of the activities that are ongoing, but you see on the slide the Helms Net documentation. The vendor has provided us with documentation for the new system, and the purpose there is so we can begin to familiarize ourselves with the functionality of the new software and also identify areas where business processes may need to change or where focused training may have to take place. Interface work is underway both on the part of the vendor and our staff. For example, we have to have interface between the Helms system and our internal accounting or financial systems, and also with the controller's office for things like student loan payments. Loan operations are busily involved in documenting their business processes, their as-is business processes. And this is important for a couple of reasons. One is to identify areas where there could potentially be improvements made to business processes as we roll out the new software, but also to lay the foundation for the development of test scripts. When we receive the software, we have to make sure we test it out utilizing our business processes or business functions to make sure it works properly and the way we expect it to. The second thing we hope to accomplish there is to eventually automate these test scripts. One of the problems we have today when the Helms software, they come out with new releases of the software, there's a very labor-intensive effort that's required to test out the software each time. And the reason for that is you have to test out not only the changes that have been made, but you need to test out the entire system to make sure the changes in one area have not affected or impacted functionality in another area. So that's very labor intensive today. It means that there's often delays in implementing new releases of software. So if we can automate that process, it'll help both Ken's staff and ours in expediting that release upgrade. Something else the vendor's involved in now is what's called a code comparison. And what that is, they're taking their baseline software and comparing it with the software we're utilizing today to identify areas where we've made enhancements or customizations to the software to suit our unique business processes. So that's an important activity because they have to make sure that those enhancements are also incorporated in the new system. ADA compliance, that's the Americans with Disability Act. As you know, that was a very key element in our contract negotiations. We spent a lot of time negotiating this issue. We were very insistent that the new software had to be compliant so that people who may be visually or hearing impaired can use the software. The current system is not compliant with the law, so we are spending a lot of time on that effort. And they're making considerable progress. They've hired a consulting company, and as of today, 95% of the web-faced software, the outward-facing software, has been made compliant, and around 20% of the internal software. So they're making good progress on that effort. DCS infrastructure, that is the hardware and software needed to operate the system. We've ordered the software for provisioning with our vendor, ATOS, formerly Xerox. We've ordered to be available in December. The project plan calls for the hardware and software to be there in January, but we've ordered it for December to give ourselves an extra month just in case we or ATOS or the vendor encounter unexpected problems. Lastly, we are receiving weekly status reports from the vendor. Those status reports highlight the tasks completed that week, the planned activities for the following week, and also any outstanding issues. We also have a bi-weekly conference call with the vendor and our team leads internally to discuss progress on the project, look at the schedule, see if anything's slipping, and to discuss any outstanding issues. And we also have a monthly project team meeting of all project team members, the 30 or so I mentioned earlier, to keep them in the loop in terms of project status and progress. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ken. You have upcoming milestones.
The main item here to note, too, that I didn't discuss earlier is one of the benefits is the enhanced functionality as we're discussing here, and it's internal within the software, but also this was over a $500,000 cost reduction to the agency on an annual basis. But we'll talk now in the next. In the next steps, basically, as Sid mentioned, we're doing the code compare. This is where we're going to reconcile our current system, which we had made some modifications to the new system, and find out if there are any gaps within that and what we need to make modifications to the new code to make sure we maintain that functionality. Setting up testing and production environments. We always need to make sure that as we're going, we're doing a hybrid model where we will test as we go. So as they build a module, we'll actually test that module and provide acceptance and then go on to the next phase, another module, et cetera. As well as when we get to the end of the project, we'll test all of the functionality collectively to make sure that there are no conflicts within. And the interface right now, we have to make sure that, it interacts with our interactive voice response unit, our IVR, printing, reporting purposes, all the other items, financial systems, et cetera, and that is on track to be completed here at 2016. And happy to answer any questions you have as far as progress. And we'll keep an ongoing status of this in the agenda each quarter.
Any questions, members? As you looked at, you mentioned $500,000 savings. Is that an annualized savings or a one-time savings?
That is an annualized savings. We had in our prior contract a graduated fee schedule. It was basically a fixed fee plus a percent of the size of the portfolio. So as I showed you in this other report, the growth of the portfolio, our fee was also growing at the same time and projected to be $1.3 million this year alone. Under this contract, collectively with maintenance plus our annual fee, et cetera, we had over $500,000 savings.
And I'm assuming that the ease and operability is going to benefit the students, the borrowers, their families, and probably the loan officers at all of these institutions, if it is as operable as it looks like it's going to be optimized to.
Absolutely, and if anything, this is going to bring us up to at least the 20th century or 21st with Windows interface, where the current software is literally a 3270 emulator. It looks like the old-fashioned green screen type functionality. So it will bring us up significantly on the ease of use, et cetera, through it, as well as some enhanced functionality that we've been able to identify with the vendor.
And we've had this conversation before, Ken, but I think you've testified to us that the majority of the student borrowers are unaware of how much they've borrowed. They're just not aware of what their amount is. Is this going to be something where we can actually give them real-time data that this is your total cumulative borrowing to date, this is your portfolio of borrowing, this is what you're going to have to pay off if you start paying it off at such time, if you graduate on time? Is that going to be able to be functionally brought into this?
Well, what I will say is this will have functionality where the borrower will be able to go into the system and see what they do have, what their payment amount is, what their debt is. But keep in mind, the borrower may have other loans outside of the coordinating board. So they could have a private loan with a private entity, Wells Fargo, Discover, Sallie Mae, some of the larger Navient private alternative loan providers out there. They may also have federal loans, which would not be loaded into the system. We're not allowed to issue federal loans since 2010. So they will have visibility to what they have with the coordinating board. We would not be able to have visibility to the rest of any other types of loans that did not run through our systems.
Would the option be available that they could actually enter those as a portfolio of loans? In other words, report to your system, I've got this other loan, I want this in my portfolio so I can look at all of my loans and look at all of my debt and look at all of my repayment plan. Would that be a feature that we could build out for the future?
That is a feature we'll look into, and I think there's maybe two ways as we're thinking about this. One could be a feature within the loan system, and we'd have to work with the vendor on that, or it may be a feature that we could try and build within our website, and maybe the website could link to the system that would already load in, I'm just thinking right now out loud, load in this type of system, and then they'd be able to enter those other type of data points and do a calculation, and here's what the future projection, et cetera. And I think if we did that, we may have more control over its future flexibility versus a current vendor who's we'd have to go back to every time to make changes. So we'll explore various options.
Yeah, and I'd be interested in the commissioner's impression on this, but I continue to hear a lot of parents and a lot of students and former students that are just coming to grips with the fact that they've spent 7 years, haven't got their degree, and they've got all this debt that they didn't recognize. Student debt is a big issue, becoming a bigger issue for all of us.
Student debt is becoming a bigger issue. That's one of the reasons it's a primary component of our strategic plan, 60 by 30 Texas. We want to keep it under control. In order to reach our goal, we're going to have to make sure that it doesn't increase beyond where it is now. And it's going to be quite a challenge to keep it stable. It's very clear we need to do a better job in higher education of informing students about good financial practice and prudence. We need to make sure students get that information in freshman orientation. We have to make sure that we take a look at the documents we send to students to make sure that they're as clear as they ought to be, and that we remember that as students they probably need to be reminded of obligations more than once. So we're constantly looking at ways we can refine the way we interact with borrowers and make sure that they know what their responsibilities are.
So I want to compliment both of you, and David Gardner's got some comments while he comes up. I think this is a vital component, and as Commissioner said, this is one of the four major pillars of the new strategic plan. Is we've got to get control of that student debt and make it manageable. And people have to understand that they're going to have to pay it back. It's not funny money. It's not the tree that grew in my backyard, my father's backyard, that just had $100 bills on it. You got to pay it back. And I think the more you can do to make it manageable and known and navigable to the borrower, I think the better off they will be. David?
I just wanted to mention, I'm glad the Commissioner brought up the plan, because one of the key strategies under the debt goal is to work to develop a system whereby students are much more aware of their debt, that it's tied in, if possible, to the marketable skills goal in terms of what they intend to do in the future. One of our things we're talking about taking to the legislature is a means to help students be aware of both the amount of loans they're eligible for plus a recommendation for how much they should actually take out. By chance, I met with a chancellor from WGU this morning about some broader issues, and she brought up that they have a system, I've forgotten what they call it, which provides the student with both what they're eligible for and what they recommend they take, which is usually less, and they've had high success with that. So we're setting up a meeting for her staff to meet with ours in the next few weeks to see how that might inform our recommendation to the legislature. So I know Chad's talked a lot about this, so I think what Ken was saying in terms of finding a way to do the broader debt is really important, and so he was right on target with that.
I agree. I think it's great to know what the debt is from our agency, but they really need to know what their total debt is, especially in some of these hybrid situations where they may be borrowing large sums of money from other entities who will be expecting that they be paid back, or there's some commitment that they have to meet a certain milestone for loan forgiveness. But they need to know what those are. And I've discussed it before, but I'm wondering if there isn't an app that could be developed where they could have their portfolio of borrowing and then also give them advice saying, this is what you're eligible for, but don't take it all out.
Right.
You don't need a pizza every night.
Our gold star, actually, if we could get to it in terms of an app, because students use apps more,
Right.
is if you could tie it in some way, if you could somehow get at their course plan of study as well, and actually when students are thinking about taking something not in it, it can actually tell them this was going to add to your debt X amount. That will be a longer-term goal, but you're exactly right in terms of apps. The students need that. It's a challenging process, but we're starting on it, and it is really one of the top three things we're going to work on initially with 60 by 30. And so your suggestion, others are things we need, and we also need to know that we've got different audiences. So you need the student, you need one that, and they tend to go through apps. Parents are more likely to go through a web location, so we need to take that into mind. In a staff meeting on Friday, we talked extensively about one of our IPD folks brought up the issue of how do we best communicate with students, and then the parents, and then the school itself in terms of how all these things are adding up. So you're going to hear a lot about this, and keep pushing us.
We will.
I know you will.
Thank you. Linda, do you have any comments?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I know this isn't something that we've talked about a lot, but I know that there are loan repayment programs with employments and different types of initiatives like that. Would it be possible to have some kind of education with links or something for different types of occupational loan repayment programs?
Absolutely, and we do have several on our website, and we work with associations as well to try and get the word out. We have a couple new loan repayment programs from this last session, and one that is renewal or rebirth of one. But a lot of these are oversubscribed at this time. We get quite a bit from our physician. We expect the same from the dental loan repayment program, et cetera. But we try and get the word out as much as we can so we get the best population of people to have the maximum impact.
Okay, so thank you for that report. Congratulations, and keep rowing. Next item is consideration of the staff's recommendation to the committee relating to a contract for Pitney Bowes Postal Services. Ken Martin will explain this item. Ken?
Thank you, Chairman. The Department of Information Resources has a master service agreement with Pitney Bowes to provide postage services for state agencies. The agency has leveraged this master service agreement in the past to support their loan program as well as the rest of the agency regarding postal services. The staff is requesting authority to spend up to $350,000 for this fiscal year 2016 under this master service agreement. A couple points: this does not require an RFQ due to the existing master service agreement, and that predominantly the loan program that we have, because we send out payment information, we send out collection letters, etc., is a predominant user of this postal, as well as a portion of the agency, but loan program's the bulk of it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? This does require approval, so I'll need a motion. Your motion, Javid. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by John. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item under finance section is consideration of adopting staff's recommendation to the committee relating to the student loan program service support. Ken Martin will present this item. Ken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This item is an item that relates to a contract we did with the Office of Attorney General for our collection functions. And as if you recall, within that contract, we were paying for a collection team that we had transitioned to the Office of Attorney General back in 2010, as well as reimbursing them for ancillary costs, other attorneys that were engaged in collection status of our loans, as well as ancillary services, which I'll describe here. And some of these items are issuing citations to delinquent borrowers, and the Office of Attorney General has agreements with 2 vendors that they use for this, and per our contract, we're required to reimburse them for that. The Office of Attorney General uses File and Express Serve for case filing, and we're requesting an estimated cost $250,000, or authority up to $250,000, and we're requesting $350,000 for the issuing citations between the 2 vendors. Now, the Office of Attorney General determines which vendor they use, so I've combined these for that purpose because we do not know at the beginning of the year what amount they'll use per, but we're requesting authority on a combined basis. And separate to that is our Texas NIC USA, as we call it. We have a DIR contract, Department of Information Resources, with them. This is a state vendor that is required to be used for credit card and ACH transactions. We use that within our loan team, and I'm requesting authority for up to $520,000 for fiscal year 2016. This is where borrowers can have their checking account drafted through Automatic Clearinghouse or ACH, can use their credit card, debit card to make payments for their loans, and this is a really good service that we did not have prior to 2010. So, in a lot of view for borrowers, we were in the dark ages of being able to make payments. It was the old check or call us up and we'll one-time draft your account. So this gave us really good functionality as well as helped us to, as one of the factors, to minimize some of our delinquencies. And,
So, question, I thought you said 520,000, but I hear it's reading 350,000. Did I miss that?
There are three separate items. One is within the Office of Attorney General on the contract under the Loan Support Services. They issue citations and they use Texas Easy Serve and Executive Process. We're requesting up to $350,000 for those two vendors combined. Separately, for case filing, File and Express Serve, we're requesting up to $250,000 for that vendor. And third is the NIC USA, and we're requesting up to $520,000, which has been our historical run rate. For that vendor, for that
And
process.
I have to apologize. You don't have the supplemental page that we sent via email subsequent to the printing of this agenda. So if we can go ahead and put off the vote until we can get a copy, Sharon? Can we get a copy of the supplemental blue page that we emailed to the board members?
I think if
go
the board
ahead.
members are comfortable, I just want to know what the accurate numbers are. We've all seen those. I just know that what Ken just presented is not what's before us. We've seen that as long as it becomes part of the record.
Yes.
Board members, are you comfortable voting on what Ken has presented that you've received via email as long as it's included into the minutes? Or do we need to actually get a formal copy of it in front of you before you want to come back and take a vote on this?
Very comfortable.
You're comfortable?
I would say if it's not too much trouble, why not have it in front of us when we vote?
We can do that.
Okay,
If it's not a big issue.
Yeah, let's come back to this item, Ken. If you don't, unless there's, we'll distribute it and then we'll take a motion in a second on that. John, is that acceptable? Are there any other questions of Ken on this particular item? Because I was a little confused and I realized I was given different piece of information electronically. So I agree with John. Let's just have the actual document in front of us. Okay, so we'll take that out of order. No other questions of Ken at this time. Thank you, Ken. The first item under the audit section of the agenda is an update on internal audit reports and activities. Mark Pale, Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, will present this item. This item does not require any action. Mark, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members. Agenda item 6A is an informational item to bring you up to date on the internal audit reports and activities since our last update in July. We completed 3 internal audit projects since the July meeting. 2 of the 3 reports are included in your materials, and I will brief you on the 3rd report in conjunction with the next agenda item on compliance monitoring. First, we completed a follow-up of our prior work on the administration of the Texas Research Incentive Program, or TRIP. We're happy to report that the corrective actions implemented have addressed the issues from that prior report. Next, you have our internal audit annual report in your materials. This is a report that's required by state law, and the format is actually prescribed to us by the state auditor's office. And what I would say about this report is that it compiles materials that you've already seen at some point during the year. For example, you approve our annual audit plan, and the report asks for that plan. It also includes our previous external peer review, and that's something that's come before the committee previously as well. So we submitted that to the state auditor's office to meet the prescribed deadline. And unless you have any questions on these two reports, in the interest of time, there's one more audit topic that I would like to briefly touch upon, and then get into a more major discussion of the loan refund reports in our next agenda item.
Members, do you have any questions? Members, do you have any questions of this section? Go ahead and proceed.
The last thing that I wanted to make you aware of is that our audit department is due for its external peer review. That's something that's required by law and by professional audit standards. The peer review is an outside look at how well we're complying with professional auditing standards. The last review was completed, was performed by the Institute of Internal Auditors, and it was delivered and presented to the committee in July of 2013. This time around, the process will be expanded. As you know, we've developed a compliance monitoring function in addition to our internal audit function, and so this peer review will be a repeat visit for internal audit, and it will be the inaugural visit for our compliance monitoring function. I plan on working with our procurement team to do a competitive solicitation for the peer review services, and I will keep you apprised of the results, timeline, and other pertinent information. If you have any questions on this agenda item, I would be happy to address it this time.
This does not require us to approve anything, so this is just informational.
That is correct.
Okay, John?
Mr. Powell, tell me about the process for finding somebody to do this peer review.
The process, really, there are major service providers out there. I mentioned the Institute of Internal Auditors. That is the governing body for internal audits globally. So they're a major service provider. But there are also all of the large public accounting firms typically have a consulting aspect that specifically provides external peer review services to organizations of all types. There are individual consultants that do work. So those are really the major players that would participate in a competitive solicitation that we've proposed. Some organizations are able to participate in more of a round-robin kind of peer review, and actually invite individuals from elsewhere in their sector to come in and do a peer review, and then typically there's a reciprocal requirement that if you participate in that, you then are obligated to go out and perform a peer review. We've had some discussion with previous board leadership as well as with the commissioner in terms of the service providers that are available, the quality of the peer review that's received, and I think the decision to this point has been to lean towards actually paying a firm to come in here so that we can be in the driver's seat in terms of the quality and thoroughness of the review that's performed.
And how much does ballpark does something like that cost?
This one will cost more than the last one because we've doubled what we're asking to be performed.
What did the last one cost?
The last one was approximately $20,000.
So we're talking about something under $50,000, probably.
In the neighborhood of 50 is what we're hoping. Yes.
And just your thoughts on the idea that, and follow me along, but that you're choosing somebody to do. Are you making the choice?
Well, the solicitation process hasn't been set up, and that's actually why I'm informing the committee. Certainly, audit does not have to be a part of that. And even if we are a part of it, I would be uncomfortable if we were the only representatives on the evaluation team. So I haven't visited with procurement or with the commissioner on this, but my thought was to sit down with them and potentially come to agreement on one or more individuals from elsewhere in the organization to sit in on the selection process so that it wasn't a process that was entirely controlled by audit.
That's what I was getting at, and of course we have confidence in you. But I think just the idea that you'd be choosing someone to review you, it seems like somebody else ought to be making
I
that
understand.
decision.
Commissioner, any thoughts on that?
Yes, we actually have done this before, and there was an occasion where I thought that the auditors were a little too close to our internal auditor at the time, and I had thought that we needed to change the process to make sure that didn't recur. So I'm attentive to your concerns, and will bring the process to you for your oversight. But yes, I'm aware that there can be too close a relationship between the auditors that are selected and the appearance of a conflict of interest.
Should board members be involved in that?
I would like that. I would think that the chair of agency ops should be involved.
Okay. Point well taken, John. Any other questions? David? Okay, I support that. Mark, if you don't mind, we have this before us now in the written form. I'd like to come back and complete that order of business, which I believe was 5D. Are there any questions of what's before you as 5D?
Could we get somebody just to summarize exactly what we're voting on?
Ken, I think this was your item. If you don't mind just coming back and summarizing, please.
See, I even left my name card.
Well, you're up next anyway. So
to summarize, we have services within the loan team that provide support for our collection activities. That is issuing citations or the case filing. And again, the request here is for issuing citations up to $350,000, and then the case filing up to $250,000. And then separately from that is our payment processing to allow us to continue the capability of credit card, debit card, and ACH payment types, which is the $520,000 for fiscal year 16.
Move approval.
I have a motion for approval. Do I have a second? And we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Next item is compliance monitoring. We're going to receive an update on compliance monitoring reports and activities. Does not require action. Mark Pale, Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, will present this item. As you know, Mark's compliance projects have a direct connection to our institutions of higher education. Today's agenda contains reports relating to student loan refund issues at Texas A&M University Kingsville and Texas State University. These reports are connected to a third report involving student loan refunds issued at the coordinating board. All three reports are going to be provided to you at this time. But before we have our guests from Texas A&M University Kingsville and Texas State University up to the table, I'd like to have Mark to discuss the overarching report that covers the coordinating board loan refund request issues. And joining Mark to respond to questions regarding the coordinating board loan refund issues is Ken Martin. And once Mark and Ken have completed their presentation, we'll bring the other representatives of the other two institutions up. Mark?
Thank you, Dr. Tischer. And before we get into this particular this set of reports, in your materials, what you were already provided, we completed 9 projects since our previous meeting in July, and so certainly happy to answer any questions that you have on those. But in the interest of time, I believe staff have provided you with 3 reports that are at your place. And they're all related, and they all deserve your attention. So I'd like to set the context. In late July, we were informed of some events surrounding Be On Time and Cal loan refunds that were received from Texas A&M University Kingsville and Texas State University, totaling about $100,000 for each institution and dating back to 2009 for A&M Kingsville and 2006 for Texas State University. We were asked to audit the circumstances surrounding these refunds and report our findings as quickly as possible. And I'd like to talk to you about why this is an urgent issue, and I've prepared 2 slides to help illustrate what we're about to talk about. So the first slide shows you the relationship, the normal flow of funds between the coordinating board, the institution of higher education, and the student borrower. So as you can see, the coordinating board sends loan funds to the institution based on the institution's certification that the student borrower qualifies for the loan, and based on the coordinating board's normal lending due diligence, such as creditworthiness and a signed promissory note. The institution disperses the loan funds to the student borrower, normally by applying the loan funds to the student tuition and fee balance. So you see it's really a 3-way back and forth between all of those, the parties on the slide. The next slide shows that same return of funds concept or flow of funds concept, but it also illustrates a fundamental breakdown in institutional refunding that led us to the discussion today. As you can see, if an institution does not disperse funds to the student borrower, such as when a student withdraws or their enrollment status causes a change in how much financial aid they're qualified to receive, the loan funds must be returned to the coordinating board so that the loan can be fully or partially canceled. If the loan funds are not returned to the coordinating board in a timely manner, the ramifications of a phantom loan are significant to the student. And if you look at the red text on the right lower side of the slide, that's what we're talking about here today for these delinquent loan refunds. In some cases, you can have student borrowers paying on a loan that was not received. You can have student borrowers taxed on a loan that was forgiven but that was not received. Or you can have a default action go forward pertaining to a loan that a student did not receive. So in looking at delinquent refunds from Kingsville and Texas State, we discovered issues at each of those institutions, as well as contributing factors at the coordinating board. So if you'll bear with me, I'd like to first briefly touch upon the coordinating board issues, and then, as the chair indicated, we can invite each of the institutions forward to talk about the institution-specific issues. So I would like to ask you to, if you could turn your attention to the report that is addressed to Dr. Paredes. These are the coordinating board issues that were resulting from our work. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of findings and then turn it over to Ken Martin to talk about management actions that have already been taken or are underway to address these items. Finding 1 on page 4 of your...
There's a question here.
Yeah, Mr. Phil, as we're getting into this, tell me how this came to your attention again.
I was notified by our management and commissioner. They recognized when the large refund checks were received from the institutions, and it was recognized that the loans that they pertained to dated back to, in some cases, 2006.
So what triggered all this was getting these large refund checks saying, what about this? And,
yes, sir.
Okay.
Finding 1 on page 4 of your report pertains to coordinating board monitoring processes. So if you ask the question, how did this condition exist and persist for so many years without detection or correction, finding 1 addresses one reason from the coordinating board perspective. There was no reporting control that enabled the coordinating board to know that the loan funds sent to an institution were actually dispersed to that student borrower. The agency is currently evaluating the most effective way to structure such a reporting process. The second finding that I would like to direct your attention to on page 5 and 6 of your report is finding 2, and it discusses the reasons why the coordinating board should have known that the risk existed in this area. And the events in the report, if you look at items A through F on finding 2, illustrate teachable moments where the coordinating board did not use information to learn, to respond, and ultimately to recognize this issue and to reduce risk. There are other items to strengthen controls over loan administration that are included in your report, but in the interest of time, unless you have specific questions at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Ken before we get back to the discussion that pertains to the institutions and our visitors that are here to talk to you today. Ken?
Thank you, Mark. Are there any specific questions on Mark's items? What I will do is actually walk through briefly each one of the recommendations as an outcome of the audit and our actions on that. So if you don't have any questions, I'll go right into it. If you do, I'm happy to address those up front that you may have.
Why don't you go ahead, and then we'll take questions of the entire plan.
Okay. Recommendation number 1 was basically, in a nutshell, the coordinating board didn't have the capability to be able to compare, as Mark illustrated. When we send the funds to the institution, they're supposed to give those funds back to the student, or basically, deposit them to their account, pay their tuition and fees, whatever the items are. And we don't have visibility that transaction occurred in the past. And so, therefore, it was an assumption that it did occur. And as we saw in this particular instance, there are cases where it didn't, but we had no visibility from the standpoint, except for item number 2, which we'll get to. So what we're looking at is trying to see, there is obviously we have our loan system, which does have a database and has all the historical data of loan disbursements. But we're trying to see, one of the items is, can we compare? We have a financial aid database where the institutions report back to the coordinating board. This is similar to our data warehouse of all the other type of educational data that we have, where we can maybe do a comparison student by student to see, is this one student in the Helm system and is this one student in what we call our FADS, financial aid database system, and are they there, and do we have a match? And then try and find the anomalies that don't match and see if then that would be our trigger to go back to the institution to say, please explain the differences. Did they report to the system inaccurately, or is it that there's money that didn't get distributed, et cetera, and then let them perform the reconciliation? So that's the item that we're exploring right now. We're hoping that can come to fruition. We're at the stage of doing the data compare between the two systems, and our next step is to try and then see if we can get it narrowed down enough, and whatever anomalies may be in there, that we could send it to a few institutions to participate, have them do some research and see if this is valid identification. And if it is, then we'll expand it to all the institutions and do that on a quarterly or annual basis as we can get through. The second item is the agency regarding, as Sid Hodgson mentioned, in our software that we have, there's an external-facing component of our software, and there's the internal for our loan program. The external-facing component is where the institutions or borrower can go into the system, look at their account. Institutions can go in and look at what loans they've issued. We're looking at some of these say will require technological support because we need to work with our vendor to see if we can get better data when a loan was canceled or other factors. It would fall off that visibility from the institution side, being able to look at our system. So they wouldn't be able to use that today for a one-to-one comparison of the reconciliation. We're trying to go back to see if we can get all the data so the institution could look at all the loans that they either requested, canceled, actually dispersed, et cetera, and then they could perform their own reconciliation in-house if that's what they wanted to do. So allow them that functionality at the same time. Recommendation number 2 was basically training of loan staff on identification and risk. There were clearly areas that, a couple of years ago, a borrower called in, and, Mr. Chairman, as you mentioned, that there's many cases where the borrower just does not even know what they have, what they've taken out. And this is really, the slap in the face to us that this is a real issue. And as Dr. Gardner mentioned, something that we need to build out in our student debt item. But with that said, basically what we're looking at is internally we need to do a better job. A borrower calls 2 years ago and says, hey, I don't remember getting this loan. Well, obviously some borrowers were astute. But we had sent them to the institution and said, you need to work with your financial aid office. We need to do a better job of taking action on that item, taking ownership of that item, following it all the way through. And we didn't. So one is the identification of risk. People need to get better in our loan program of identifying that seems significant, that seems unusual, et cetera. And then bringing that up through the chain within the program to better understand, identify. We want to be able to know the occurrences of these, if they're frequent, et cetera, and go from there. Two items one item that was resulted to be on time audit is risk management rollout to the agency was recently performed in August, as well as I held a division-specific risk management to my management team and below, all supervisory individuals, to get more specific, lay out my expectations within the division, and then the next step is to roll that out to the rest of the division, as well as walking through key scenarios like we've seen here, other ones that could come out, and walking individuals through those to try and help them and reiterate the fact that identification is key up front. Sometimes you won't know there's an item until your borrower identifies it for you. That's the unfortunate situation. You'd like to be proactive, but when that occurs, we need to move, we need to act, and get resolution. And there's cases where we hadn't. Item number 3 relates to records retention. We have a memorandum of understanding, MOU, with each one of the institutions where we do provide student loans. In the memorandum of understanding, it states essentially that the records need to be retained 5 years beyond the expiration of that MOU. In Mr. Pale's review of these institutions, some institutions had confusion on specifics to records retention relating to the MOU. So we will look at the MOU, which is coming due here at the end of the year, and look to revise the language and make it much more prescriptive, a fixed number of years from the date that loan was initiated, or some verbiage to that effect that'll make it very clear to any institution how long they should be retaining records, because it made it more difficult when the records weren't retained for Mr. Pale to go back and then try and identify what occurred back in 2008, 2009 if the institution didn't have the records and the detail of what occurred with that loan and why. Recommendation number 4. We have a couple unique instances here aligning the program guidance language with the education code. There's what we call program guidance that the division tries to take instead of making the institutions read the education code or go through any interpretation, try and provide that to the institutions. And there are cases where that guidance that we provided within the agency and our division to the institution differed from the statute. And we're having general counsel take a review of the statute to get a final interpretation from that standpoint, and then from there we will align our rules and our guidance to the statute to make sure that we're in alignment on all 3. Number 5, establish and publish and make available to institutions forms for applications, deferment, et cetera. So the coordinating board had a federal loan program as well as the college access loan program, our CAL loan program. Right now we have the CAL. In 2010, the federal government halted the federal program and went only to select entities for federal loans. And so we have not issued federal loans since 2010. Back at that point, they were using the federal forms for items such as deferment. After an individual received a loan, they may graduate, they may request deferment, forbearance, et cetera, on the loans. And since the some students had a federal loan and a Cal loan, as we discussed earlier. They were using the same form for the same purpose. It wasn't for the application up front in the origination, but it was on the back end when we're requesting those specific types of items. Well, that practice was still in place, and we need to change that. We have not, it's less than 1% of our entire portfolio are federal loans. And so those types of items are dwindling. We still need to use federal forms for those particular practices and loans, but we need to create our own coordinating board identifiable loans. They may have a lot of the same fields and same requirements, but we need to make sure the student understands this is a coordinating board loan that you're asking this on and submitting the application versus a federal loan. Number 6, establish comprehensive written procedures addressing all aspects of the Cal administration, documentation of factors and granting forbearance, quality control, etc. Some of the items there that we need to get better on is it was noted that we may be doing certain actions correctly, but we weren't consistent necessarily in how we were validating those. So if a supervisor is checking up on Ken on how he's doing processing forbearance or deferments or forgiveness, we weren't consistent. We didn't have procedures documenting how many times, how many samples should I be taking, how often should I be performing this, etc. And we're in process of developing those to make it consistent, roll out to the division. We're also reorganizing the division from what it looked previously to create a borrower services and institution services. So institutions having questions, calls are going to one area. That area will see all the types of institutional inquiries. We'll have a borrower services area, which will see all the borrower inquiries. So when you can identify, when items come up in question, that one area will see it all instead of one question goes to one area and a different question goes to a different area, and they may have related together two borrowers with the same item. And recommendation number 7 is revamp the procedures to administer access to HelmNet. HelmNet is our external-facing software that I mentioned that we're looking to revise so that the schools can get better data for their own reconciliation, but also we need to do a better job of administering access to that. There's cases where we do not go back to the institution after whoever had access may have left, transferred to another institution, and timely canceled their access. When somebody requests access, we may have them fill out a form or we may have them fill out information on an email. We need to be consistent throughout the process of granting access and trying to ensure that institutions don't have one form for one individual and then are sharing that access within there. And we need to work as well within that. And at this point, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Questions?
Yes, I've got a question. Is there any way Texas Education Board independently send emails to the student independent of the institute and make them verify how much money they have borrowed and also show them how much will it cost to pay them back so that the student is aware and make them verify it?
We do send information to the student, and I think that's where a couple students were astute enough to see that and contact us, and that's where we didn't, 2 years ago, didn't react appropriately. I think the information is there. I think what we talked about earlier is necessary. We need to get better at identifying, helping the student identify all collectively the debt that they have.
And the sources of the debt.
And the sources of the debt, because anything we send is only one small picture of the collectively the debt that they've received over time, that they've worked with their financial aid office, and they may be over a couple institutions as well if they've transferred. So I think a collective solution is what we're suggesting, and what Mr. Chairman had mentioned earlier would be probably more prudent, because we've seen cases where students, we can say you had 4 loans and they were making payments and they accepted that. So what we sent them was such, but they relied on whatever we sent them, and that's probably part of the breakdown too. We need to get better at educating them financially up front to better understand. They will sign a promissory note, and they did with the institution, and everything was moving along. Just the funding, whether it got deposited in their account, they actually received it, they didn't keep track. And we need to do a better job of educating them of that.
Ken, I would also add part of the issue is being crystal clear in the communication with the students. And so what Ken was mentioning a moment ago about the forms that we trade back and forth with the students, being very clear that these are coordinating board loans, that they're not federal loans, because it's confusing. It's a confusing enough landscape without us adding to the confusion of using a form that's mislabeled or that might cause a student to question, okay, which loan is this? So I think when we correct that and very clearly brand our forms as our loans, that will help as well.
It's very clear that some students do not keep good track of their loans. We've had instances where students were called to pay loans that they never received, never took out, and they diligently started paying them off because they didn't have good records. So we have to remember we're dealing with young people who haven't reached the zenith of their sense of responsibility yet. So,
I have a clarification question. Forgive me for my ignorance, but when the coordinating board gives the school a loan, let's say they're going to give a school, like, let's say $100,000 for loans. Do they know, when they give that money, do they know exactly which students it's going to?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, my thought is that, the disappointing aspect of this is that it's affected students in a negative way. And I'm trying to get my arms around it, but it looked like maybe in the A&M Kingsville it was 28.
Correct.
And then Texas State is
31.
31.
Yes.
And how big is this issue? Are there going to be more institutions?
That's the question the commissioner asked when we first brought this up, and we walked through it, and it really all of us were surprised at it, because I don't think this was anything that had been identified or known before. And then that was the next question. Well, if it's 2 out of however many, are these the only 2 instances, and do we have a much broader problem? One of the items that we went back with is we ran a report, as Mark noted in his audit. I had the team run a report to say, basic query since a certain time frame, what institutions, when did we process a loan that was greater than a year old, a cancellation, basically, and then a certain code in the system, et cetera. And there were quite a few. I think over 400 is noted here. Now, we don't know the specific detail behind those. Those could have come back 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and there may be items where back then we weren't doing what we needed to do and identify like we did this time. We got a large check, and instead of just processing it rote, we should have gone, something's wrong. So certainly process-wise, things this time, the identification was there, it was brought up, and so on. So my feeling is it's occurred in the past. Are there other looming items out there? I suspect so. We've asked institutions. One point I'll make note of is Dr. Chad Pols, Deputy Assistant Commissioner over the Student Financial Aid Office, did send out an email to all the institutions, financial aid offices, asking them, we've identified there's been some issues. We didn't go into specifics, but we asked them to perform reconciliations of those accounts, as we've seen with others, to try and see if they can identify and eliminate this issue. We have heard from a couple offices that they are in the process of doing so. So we do not know the depth of this potential issue, but we certainly have seen other institutions start looking into it.
we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
That's where we are right now.
Yeah, so I want to kind of jump in here, John, because that's the question. How big an issue is this? Right. And I think staff has rightfully told all the other institutions, we've got a Sentinel event here, actually 2 Sentinel events here. You might want to take a real good look at your pattern and practice in your own institution. I like the recommendations. I like the response. I think that's healthy, and I'll be looking forward to being them implemented. It seems to me that when we send the institution the money, that the individual student should also be notified that we sent money that's tagged with your name on it. You've already signed a promissory note, so you're already on the hook at that point in time. And it should be, it seemed to me, that the institution at some point in time should report that they've actually dispersed the money. And so we need a check and balances. So it's a check, recheck, 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 so everybody understands. And I think that's where this app is going to be able to really help out, because we're going to be able to tell the student, we sent your institution some money that's tagged with your name on it. We've got your promissory note. You're going to start paying on this. And you might want to go down to the financial aid office and ask them, where's my money? Since you're going to pay for it. My question would be, is it possible that someone received money that was on somebody else's promissory note, or that somebody received money that was never tagged with a promissory note, and really somebody received funds but isn't having to pay them back? Is it possible that we have that reverse error? I know we have the error where they didn't get the money, they're having to pay it back, but is it possible that they receive funds? Is that error possible within the system?
I think it's possible. I think the only way that you can definitively answer that is to go out and conduct an audit and actually look student by student and look at the supporting documentation at the institution and compare that to the coordinating board records and make a determination, which is problematic. It's certainly problematic from the standpoint of resources and knowing that this issue may reside elsewhere in the state. The problem with the email approach, it's a good approach to ask institutions to look at this area, but if an institution was not diligent in managing loan funds and return of those funds, it's possible that they may not be diligent in responding or, taking an email seriously. So, we've been struggling with working with our program staff to try to refine these queries, try to identify the institutions where, from a data standpoint, it looks like it potentially could be problematic. And then a decision will need to be made at that point in time, either a self-reporting mechanism with possibly a follow-up audit. There are some options there that we can explore in terms of what work we ask the institutions to perform, what work management may want to review, and to what extent we want the audit function involved. Clearly, the risks, the impact point to, the need to stay involved, and we're prepared to do that. But it's the data analysis aspect of this is not as straightforward as we would like. We're trying to enhance that going forward, but when you're looking back at 10 years or even 5 years worth of data, you're talking about typically a student oftentimes receiving multiple loans in multiple disbursements across multiple reporting periods. And so when you go back and you try to analyze our disbursement of that to the institutions in comparison to what they have separately reported for other financial aid programs, there's a lot of issues with timing, and so you get a lot of essentially dirty, false positive kind of information. And so we're trying to refine that, trying to get better to see which institutions do we really think we may need to pay closer attention to and potentially go out and do further audits or assessments.
Yeah, my prediction is going to be is a student who received funds that didn't have a loan book to them is probably not going to call up and report that to us.
That sounds...
I think we could probably earn interest
correct.
on that, all of us.
Well, and the other point to that is if a student that took out a loan didn't know they had a loan, a student that didn't may not know that something got applied to whatever account, and they just didn't get as big of a bill as they thought they should.
And
then
the
obviously
reason
they
that we
wouldn't
give
inquire.
the money to the institution is because we believe that
We are not allowed to give it directly to the student.
And what is your idea of what that reason is? That they maybe use it to divert for other sources or other expenditures and wouldn't use it to fund the educational grant.
That would be my assumption when the program was created and the guidance and statute for that.
And we've got a couple institutions
and I
that
would
can probably weigh in on that,
Yeah, much better than I can, but that would be my support. I would not want to hand my son going to school $4,000 check and then say, I hope you pay.
Mr. Martin, was it you that approached Mr. Pohl and said, we've gotten these $100,000 refund checks?
Well, my team, Dr. Chad Pulse, brought it up to my attention. I immediately brought it up to Linda's attention, and then we, that same day, went to the commissioner and said, we think we have an issue. Here's what it looks like. And at that same point in time, we brought in Mark at his request to have the discussion. And the commissioner immediately requested, as we went through more detail on this, that Mark perform an audit and go out and actually visit the institutions.
So that part's good. You know, that was the right way to react to that. But the reason we don't know how big a problem this is, it's just happened to be that those checks related to Texas State University and Texas A&M Kingsville. Is that correct? And so then you followed up with those specific institutions. You found, we talked about it earlier, but 28 students in one and 31 in another.
Correct.
So it could be a pretty big problem, right? Because remind me how many institutions are out there?
Well,
where this could be a problem.
This loan program supports public and private, and even community college.
So give me a number, just
100, over
100.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
So we look at 28 or 30 times that. You know, it's a lot of students affected. Yeah.
There's two factors as we were talking about that we're looking at. One is, can we go back historically and take a look and try and identify if this issue's out there and it has occurred in the past, and we need to try and solve that. And then separate, the second part of this is, how can we put a process in place that's sustainable so we can identify this on an ongoing basis? Because we have risk where if an institution for spring of 2015 semester returns us money late in this fall semester, a student may at that point already have entered into repayment. It needs to be timely, it needs to be diligent, and we need to think through our process. The system that we're talking about going backwards, that only gets updated by the institutions once a year, and it still hasn't been updated for 15. So we can only look at 2014 data, and 15, I think, is December. So there's even a time lag between fall semester and now that it would be a decent process, but it's not the ideal process. And we're trying to work through what is that ideal without putting burdensome additional reporting requirements on the institutions. One of the items that we are looking at is the federal government has certain requirements on the federal loans and reporting requirements and reconciliation, and we may have to institute those for the Cal program.
Well, so we might have potentially I'm thinking we probably do have thousands of students affected by this. Wouldn't you think so?
I certainly hope not. I could only speculate at this point. I certainly feel that the potential is broader than what's out there right now. It'd be difficult for me to say that it's 1,000 students, but I certainly think there are more than what's been identified.
I think so we got that issue, but then I think what Dr. Tesher was getting at is that it's an opportunity to look at the big picture. So you started out showing us that relationship and all that. The way this is done is statutory. Is that what you're saying?
Only from the standpoint that we're required to give it to the financial aid office and not directly to the student.
But this is something that are good. You all have a lot of expertise and to look at, and I'd like somebody to be looking at it. Is this the ideal way to do it, or is this a way that we're doing it that just sets us up for this type of thing?
We're absolutely taking a look at that. It's difficult. I would be very uneasy to put the money into the hands of the student for various reasons. We're trying to eliminate student debt, and last thing we want is going to buy pizza for dinner every night, steak dinners, and what have you, or 40-inch TV. And I think a lot of students would manage the money very appropriately, and there may be some that don't. So it's a delicate balance, but we are absolutely looking through that entire process as well, and if there's a legislative remedy that we need at the same time.
But, thinking about exactly what John's saying, if a student today was to call us and say, hey, I got a debt here that I don't think I received the money, In the past, we said, you go work with the institution. Now, do we actually directly intervene and say, you know what, we're going to call the institution, you should call them as well, let's stay in touch, and the three of us are going to have a very poignant, prompt conversation about where is that money, did
Yes.
you really receive it? So we're no longer a disinterested third party saying, go talk to the institution. We're going to actually directly intervene, and your office is going to get involved in that now.
That is what we're driving towards. We're also, we have some cultural changes to shift patterns of many years of the disinterested party, as you mentioned, to changing the culture and the mindset to say, no, you are interested, and that is part of your job.
Whose culture? Is it our culture inside this building?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well,
And that when I say culture,
I'm gonna,
within that
I'm
department.
going to strongest way encourage all of you to change the culture.
Oh, we absolutely
Yeah.
are. I mean, that is,
I know
when
you
I say
are.
culture, I mean within the department for prior management.
But I want that on the record for this meeting. I know the answer. It was a rhetorical question because we've had that conversation already. So that's already changed. Somebody calls us, it's an event, it's a Sentinel event, somebody rang the fire alarm, we're going to get interested, we're going to go investigate, and we're going to find out it's the truth. You got the money, you didn't get the money, you owe the loan, you don't owe the loan.
Correct.
Or if the institution still has the money, we're asking them, why didn't you send the money back? If you didn't disperse the money, why is it not back here? It's a semester ago, 5 semesters ago, 5 years ago. That's too long.
Right. And then work through a remedy,
Please.
Notification to the borrower, et cetera.
There are a couple of issues that I wanted to call your attention. We had an issue a number of years ago where there was a concern that dealing with issues, financial issues inappropriately was widespread across a number of institutions. And one of the conversations we had among members of the board was whether we were going to move from trying to coordinate with a fairly light hand to policing the institutions with a much heavier hand. And my recommendation is that we stick to the light approach until we had evidence that suggested we needed to have a heavier hand. I think if we convey the image that we're policing institutions, that would change our relationship with universities and colleges in a way that I don't think would be beneficial. We sent that letter out to the institutions to ask them to let them know of a significant problem that had become manifest in our work with the institutions, and we hope they will take a close look at this. We will do some spot monitoring to make sure that that's the case. We are going to change internal practice. I've been very pleased that Ken has taken a strong approach to some complacency that we uncovered here in the agency. We are now taking a look at hiring an outside consultant to look at the way we oversee our financial operations to make sure that complacency hasn't become the norm. There's some other issues that we're taking a look at. I've been gratified. Mark has done a wonderful job. He got to the bottom of this complex situation in record time, and you've seen from his report that he's acted very professionally and expertly. We're taking a look at this, but I wanted to make certain that the board approves of the view that we want to function as a coordinating board, not as a policing organization. And we'll do that as long as we can, and if we find that we need to take a stronger hand, we'll figure out ways to do that with the support and the approval of the board.
Yeah, and I completely agree that we should be coordinators, not the police force. I would like us, and I think we've got 2 institutions that we're going to hear from here momentarily, and hear how did they discover this. I would also like the other institutions that are out there, hopefully listening in, to identify best practices. how are they doing it right, so that we could publicize this to the other institutions. We don't want to be your police, but at the same time, we definitely want fairness for all of the borrowers and the students, and we want good stewardship of the funds that we entrust to the institutions, and we want it done timely. Failing that, if we find that there is a problem or potentially a problem, I think that it behooves us to institute these type of policies and practices in that. I would, I guess, announce to everybody that we really became aware of this, I believe, in late July. Am I correct on that? Is that when the refunds came? So all of this has taken place, I believe, in an expedited fashion inside of a 3-month window. So I really want to compliment the staff of the board on getting their hands around this, alerting other institutions, and then working with the 2 institutions where there was a problem on their own individualized workout plans so that they can make the student borrowers or the students that were not borrowers whole in a timely fashion. So I would agree with you, Commissioner, that we should not become a police force, but we do need to understand what are the best practices out there, which of the financial aid offices are doing it really well, and the 2 institutions, what did you find within your own internal controls that you've now corrected? And let's publicize that to all of the other institutions that get coordinating board funds, and let's make this a positive win-win for everybody.
That sounds very sensible to me. Our number one priority has been and will continue to be student welfare. Yep. And we will take whatever steps within our authority are necessary to take care of that.
So unless there's a specific question of these 2 gentlemen, Mark, do you mind introducing our guests?
Just one more quick mention,
Please.
And this will be a sort of a trailing discussion that we can pick back up in January. But obviously, we put all hands on deck given the seriousness of this situation from both compliance monitoring and internal audit. And so this has definitely impacted our board-approved plans for 2016 for both of those functions. And so we're going to do some assessment. We're going to reserve enough hours to continue working with management so that we can be a part of the solution of identifying the other institutions and doing the necessary audit work. But I will bring that information back to the committee at the January meeting and ask for your approval for amended plans at that time, and we can have further discussions.
So I think you're talking about agenda item 6A, where it says field work on hold for the follow-up audits, the TAC 202, and the internal audit annual self-assessment. I would tell you, as the chair, you have to pay attention to this as your top priority, and it's appropriate you put those other matters on hold.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So with that, I would like to invite our institutional guests to join the discussion from Texas A&M University Kingsville and from Texas State University.
And once you all are seated, if you don't mind introducing us and give us your institution and title.
Stephen Talent, President of Texas A&M University Kingsville.
Monroe Lujan, Vice President for Enrollment Management, A&M Kingsville.
Christopher Murr, Director of Financial Aid and Scholarships at Texas State University.
Stephanie Lopez, Assistant Director at Texas State University.
Okay, welcome, and thank you for being here. We appreciate you being here to present to us. And is there an order we're going to go in? Kingsville first?
Kingsville first, please.
Okay, sir, if you don't mind, please.
Yes, sir. Dr. Tischer and committee members, thank you for allowing us the time to come today to address this very important issue. I know you have a very busy agenda today, and I will not take much of your time. I want to look at the overview here, and then we can answer some questions that you may want to, based on the presentation previously. First, on behalf of the administration of Texas A&M University Kingsville, I want to express my sincere apologies to the coordinating board, the citizens of Texas, and the students involved in this inexcusable oversight. As you know, our students from Texas A&M University Kingsville come from extremely modest means. Every penny makes a difference in their education and their future. To have complicated their lives by creating additional financial difficulty is, as I said, inexcusable. While the oversight included several departments, divisions, and perhaps agencies, I want you to know two things. First, I take this very seriously. Second, I take full responsibility for everything that happens on my campus. With that in mind, I'm here today to assure you that I have been and I will continue to be involved in every step of the process as we move forward. My plan is to first take care of these students. Second, to ensure that this never happens again on my campus. I assure you that we are well on our way to meeting this plan, as evidenced by our response to the audit report. As of today, individualized letters have been mailed to each student, and we're rectifying the mistakes that we have made. We have also hired an interim director of financial aid who has 14 years of experience with Banner and financial aid across the country, and she's doing a thorough analysis of everything we do, not only in financial aid, but in many of our clearing accounts. At this time, I want to publicly thank Mr. Mark Pell and his staff, as well as Mr. Albert Contreras and his staff for all the help they have provided us. Their time, patience, and expertise have been invaluable. Again, thank you for your time and opportunity to speak before you today. I'd be glad to answer any questions you have regarding this matter.
Dr. Lujan, do you have any remarks?
I'm here to assist Dr. Talon with any questions in particular that you may have.
Okay.
So I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Well, I know that Dr. Talon is a wonderful leader at Texas A&M, and I just want to tell you I'm very impressed that you would come before us and accept full responsibility for this. And I just you've got a great reputation. This adds to it in terms of being a good leader.
Well, thank you.
Great leader.
I'm sorry I had to be here, though.
Yeah, well, I think I would echo John's sentiments. Thank you for your comments, and we'll have some follow-up questions. But why don't we hear from Dr. Murr or Stephanie Lopez, whoever's going to actually do the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Tischer, and thank you for your time and for the committee's time, too, on this very important matter. First, I want to say thank you to the coordinating board, and especially Ken Martin, Mark Pale, and Albert Contreras for their work, really in reviewing and their time and effort in reviewing our work on this very important issue. As indicated in the reports, since 2006, our university has received about $63 million in Beyond Time account funds, which is a very important part of our portfolio in being able to assist students in terms of reaching their educational goals. What we identified was that for the academic years 2006 to 2009, we learned that there was additional balance. That was sort of a trigger for us that we need to do a full reconciliation of those accounts and determine what funds needed to be returned. We did identify that in the Beyond Time and Cal, we had to return about $108,000 for 31 students. And based on the review of the coordinating board, they have issued for us 3 recommendations. The first was to work very closely with the coordinating board to resolve this situation fully and try to ameliorate the situation for the students. We have done so, and beginning Friday, we'll start communicating with students with letters, and any refunds will be sent out subsequent to those notifications. Also, to address the issue, we have designated Stephanie Lopez, who's our Assistant Director for Scholarships, to liaise with the coordinating board, but also to work very closely with the students throughout the process. You'll note from the report that for 2014, our current processes, the coordinating board did a full review and they found no exceptions. And in order to continue ensuring we don't have any exceptions of this sort again, we will continue as we have since award year 2011, doing monthly reconciliations. In addition, we set up an additional safeguard, an additional quality assurance measure outside of the normal reconciliation process as an additional alert so that we can ensure we continue to make timely returns of funds to the coordinating board for any students that may be affected, become ineligible for funds that were received, and those funds need to be returned. In addition, we have set up, because the university does see this as such a serious issue, even though our reconciliation, our tracks, and following best practices have allocated additional funds to create an additional accountant within our accounting team. That will again provide us additional depth to continue facilitating the timely return of these funds. In terms of the second recommendation, the coordinating board did identify an additional $2,400, which we have returned. And the third recommendation is to be sure that all of our written policies are in alignment with the 5-year record retention requirements of the MOU between our entities, and that work has already begun too. And again, I apologize for this issue because especially it not only has an impact on y'all, but on the students that we're here to serve. And I really appreciate the collaboration, the partnership the coordinating board has shown in working with us to try to resolve this as timely and as quickly as possible for the benefit of the students. And thank y'all very much.
I'd like to thank both of the institutions for coming and presenting. I think you've taken this on in the appropriate manner. To me, it seems the principle should be, number one, is that no student who should be harmed by this, that they should be made whole. If there is some legal action that the Attorney General's office is trying to take and collect them, they need the slate wiped clean. So whatever they need, I would ask that your institution, and I know that staff has reported that both of your institutions are taking care of everything. And then we need to actually look at controls to never have this happen again. And I'm hearing from both of you that is, but I'm going to let the commissioner make some comments as well.
Well, I wanted to say I've spoken to President Talent several times about this issue and been very impressed with his sense of urgency and concern about looking out for the students who were affected by these mistakes. I've spoken to President Trouth. She also expressed a sense of urgency and a desire to get this straightened out as quickly as possible. So there's no doubt in my mind that the institutions responded precisely as we would have liked them to. I think we need to make sure that I would hope that you might discuss this at the system level and take a look, ask your sister institutions to take a look at this issue and perhaps
Billy Hamilton recently went out with a letter to all the presidents surrounding this issue. But, and for me as a president, what has gotten my attention, it's not just this issue, it's all clearing accounts. We have a lot of clearing accounts with a lot of money in them, and I'm told every year this, and that. I'll be looking at every clearing account for every line item every year from now on. And I think that all CEOs need to understand that what may be said in clearing, we have lots of money in clearing accounts. So we have one clearing account that has $100,000 in it. Doesn't seem like a lot of money. I have others that have millions that are going through. You pay attention to that. Nobody paid attention to the one with the $100,000 that had the most impact of all, though. I've learned that lesson.
A question.
Please go ahead.
Just curious, how many students were affected, and what kind of amount we are talking about?
At our campus, 28 students with
106,000, a little over $106,000.
And the largest being $5,800 for one student. So the most, there's still a lot of money. $5,800 for one student. That was one.
And at Texas State University,
Your institution, right?
I'm sorry?
Was it 31 at your institution?
31 institutions for approximately $108,000.
So the gentleman from Texas State, I'm embarrassed. I don't have my glasses on. I can't read your name. What is it?
Dr. Murr.
Dr. Murr. Tell me, were you the one that discovered it at your institution? Or who was the person? And I want to understand a little bit more about how this got on somebody's radar screen.
Sure. It was actually sort of an integrated approach. So Stephanie is the assistant director for our scholarships and our accounting sections, and we identified that in previous years prior to my becoming director that we still had balances in those accounts. So that was our initial red flag. And then as we started digging, we realized that we really were holding on to additional funds that should have been returned during those years, which led to us then doing a full reconciliation.
What started it was just noticing in a clearing account that there was, any money or just
a credit balance.
What? Pardon me?
A credit balance.
Credit balance at the end of the year.
Yeah. And it's so, I mean, remember, I don't know much about this, but that account should have zero in it? Is that, okay, so it's as easy as saying it should be zero, and yet there's still, I'm looking at it, and there's a...
In our old the old format of our accounts. The way that it was set up was there was one account that was used for the core board accounts, so that it was never really at a zero balance because you were always receiving funds from the next award year, so you never really saw that. One mechanism that we put in, a control that we put in 2013, is we created odd-even accounts so that each fiscal year we're switching the fund that we're using, and that way we can achieve that zero balance every year and make sure that all funds have been either dispersed or returned.
And an additional layer of alert to us, too, is our General Accounting Office several years ago put into place a mechanism. If there are any funds at the end of the year that are above zero, they'll notify us. So they serve as an additional alert for us. On top of our manual review, they'll notify us electronically if there are funds still in those accounts at the end of the fiscal year.
So one of the important things that we do is coordinate. And I'm going to assume that you have colleagues that have similar offices in all of the higher education institutions across this state, not maybe even this country. Is there a way for a forum to present how you found it, what you found, what controls you now are going to institute, and how this is going to be managed? Is there a way to, nobody wants to be the poster child, but this is a sentinel event. How do we say, there but for the grace of God, go you? And don't do this. This is what we found out, and this is how you can kind of keep track of it, and this is our recommended workout plan.
I think from a financial aid perspective, the two best vehicles for doing that are, one, through our state association, and I sit on that board, and we'd be willing to have those type of conversations. We also have a financial aid compliance committee that many four-year universities participate in. That would be a good venue for that conversation as well. And I think, too, we could also address the Financial Aid Advisory Committee and getting their support and the word out and driving those type of sessions. But we could certainly, Stephanie and I do every year, typically with the coordinating board, a session on reconciliation of federal accounts. We could certainly do sessions on reconciliation of state accounts as well in terms of best practices, just to help other institutions understand really what they should be doing in terms of these types of funds and accounts.
I think that would be very helpful. And I think that's what we would appreciate if you, and I saw nodding over here, I'm assuming you are agreeing completely with what he's saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we agree with what he's saying, because that's the proper channels to have these discussions and presentations. Is through the professional organizations.
Ms. Lopez, now, I don't know that much about this, but are you saying it might be as simple as the fact that for each of these you keep a separate account, and then that way you could in an instant see if it had money in it or whether it was at zero where it should be, and that maybe the problem was that you were putting it all into, you were putting different programs into one account?
We were using an account, a multi-year account, so that it wasn't fiscal year based, so that funds were received for each award year in that same financial account, versus now where we have two separate fiscal accounts set up, so that as we receive money for fiscal year 16, the fiscal year 17 money will not commingle with that going forward. And so that we can always achieve that zero balance and make sure at the end of the day or the end of the year that the balance is zero.
Because Dr. Talon, you're saying you're going to look at these accounts. Is it something that simple that if you were looking at it, you know something's wrong if it's not zero?
Sort of. Okay. Let me say that when I questioned, we have clearing accounts and they have money in them at the end of the year, how come? The answer is always to me, which I won't accept again, is they're clearing accounts. There's always money coming in and there's always going out, so you're never going to be zero. So logically, that makes sense for me. Obviously, we have to have, and I'm not an accountant, okay? I want a procedure that I know how much of that money has remained in that account over a period of time. So it may always fluctuate up and down, but there's money that stayed in there over a year or so. I need to know exactly what that money is and have an explanation. That's what I'm looking at, if that makes sense. Okay, so I think it can be simplified, and I think. And I appreciate everything that the coordinating board is doing, and I think that their recommendations are spot on, but we should have handled this at campus. There's no doubt in my mind, and we didn't have the correct accounting procedures to do it, and the people watching it like they should have been, and that has to take place under my watch.
No, I was also going to say this isn't just a financial aid issue, the accounting situation. It's two areas of the university working together and monitoring accounts to check each other out, if you will, or work together to make sure this does not occur again. And that's what we have in place. We have new accounts that have been established, and we have processes and procedures whereby it's not just financial aid looking at accounts, it is also the finance side of the house working together to make sure that the accounts are being handled correctly.
Thank you for coming. I think we would enjoy a final report when you have it all wound up. And certainly, I know Mark, Ken, Commissioner, and the board would be very interested in helping promote best practices and publicize how this really doesn't need to happen to anybody else either. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, did you have any other follow-up on this, or Ken?
No, sir. That concludes my discussion.
Thank you for that report. For agenda item 8, the executive session, the committee is going to meet in a closed meeting to deliberate the following manner. Pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074, Agency Operation Committee will meet in closed session to discuss performance evaluations of the Commissioner, the General Counsel, and the Internal Auditor, since these employees report to the Board. No other business of the committee will be discussed before we reconvene in open session. Be noted that the time is 1600 hours, and we will go into executive session in that room over there.
The governor's office did announce, issued a press release on
Yes. Yes, just Bill. Session has concluded. No action was taken during the executive session. The time is now 16:19 hours. The committee is now reconvened in regular session. And at this time, I will entertain a motion to approve item 4A, consideration of approving an increase in the commissioner's annual salary from $191,926 to $205,160 in accordance with the 2016-2017 General Appropriations Act.
So move.
I have a motion.
Second.
I have a second. Is there any discussion?
I think our commissioner's doing a wonderful job. And I'm thinking that based on our discussion that's I think the other board members feel the same.
I have the similar feeling that I have been informed by some senior members that Commissioner has